evening, everyone. Benedict Lecca here, your friendly librarian, and I'm thrilled to welcome you this evening for a very special event. We wanted to come out strong. This is like the opening event for 24. Just set the pace for the rest of the town. So this evening, we're going to have two very distinguished speakers, thought leaders. Remember that, besides what we do in terms of programming, exhibitions, poetry readings, all that, at Bedrock, we're a civic commons. We're a space where people come together and discuss important issues. And so this is one such event. You may recall that we've had them in the past. We had one discussion on the appropriate architectural style to additions to historic buildings, the legalization of marijuana, the Spring Project. So this is just what we do. So this evening we have a man that we don't need to introduce. Everybody knows him, Mayor Xay is here. And he is going to have a friendly chat with best-selling author James Rhee. James Rhee is a businessman, philanthropist, trained in law, and the author of a brand new best-selling book, Red Helicopter, A Parable for Our Times. And I'm looking at the various key words that goodwill, collective good, kindness. Is it possible to be successful and kind? Empathy and beauty and aesthetic pleasure, those are all the things that we're interested in. So I want to welcome you all, and please join me in welcoming Mayor Xay and James Rhee.
Good evening. How's everyone? Yeah, the turnout's impressive, but then again, it is a free event. But we have the weather countering, and I think it worked out. I want to start with a thank you. I want to thank Benedict and Patty, and of course, I know he's out here somewhere, Dan Benson, who originally we have to thank for putting us all together for this event. Serving all of you has been one of the great privileges of the past year and a half of my life. And one of the things I've tried to do throughout that process is tap some of the smartest people I could to give me guidance on how you take on the rather unusual role that it is to be mayor of Newport. And I wanted to share a little bit of some of the conversations that I had had with people that have been impactful on my decision-making process and who helped me get through the day-to-day. One of those people is the gentleman who's here sitting to my left today, James Rhee. And the way I met James is kind of a funny story. I think it's probably a good place to start. I was at a conference, and there was a literal room of billionaires. And James was there to speak about his transformative ideology on how you can combine both kindness and math to do things that are truly transformational. And at a part in his story, he talks about leaving this private equity fund that he's at, standing up and saying, I believe in this company that I know most of you think is dead. I believe in the potential of the women that work there and the community they've built, and I'm going to leave to make sure we turn this company around and give it a second life. And so he had that Jerry Maguire moment where he says, who's coming with me? And he walks out the door, and one person goes with him. Now, when I went to run, I made a decision to leave the world of investment management, and I called a fraternity brother who had left the world of investing to become a stand-up comic. And I said, Randy. And Randy is not a high moral character individual, but he's somebody who I thought I could relate to on this nonsensical decision. I said, is this a crazy idea? And he said, no, I think if that's where your heart is telling you to go, that's the best idea you could make, the best decision you could make. He goes, I made a decision a number of years ago. There was a guy who left our private equity fund to go turn around this women's fashion retail company. And I thought, oh my goodness, it's the same guy. And so James finishes telling this story about Ashley Stewart and the turnaround and his red helicopter methodology. And I raised my hand at the end during the Q&A, and I said, I know who that one person was, because that's the same person I turned to for advice when I decided to take on the venture that I'm in right now. And so from that point forward, we became fast friends, and we bonded on everything from how we were both the children of pediatricians, and my mother's here this evening. You'll be hearing a bunch about that, to losing a loved one to Parkinson's, to studying law and finance, and the ability to move between different worlds and how that can change how impactful we are. And so I think that is as fitting an introduction as I could give James as the number of deals that you've turned around, or number of books that you sold at this point. And so without further ado, I want to turn it over to James to talk about Red Helicopter. Ladies and gentlemen, best-selling author, James Rhee.
Thanks, Mayor. Hi. I love the Jerry Maguire moment. That did happen. Thank you for having me. I live in Newton with my wife and 3 kids, and I actually just landed back from Stockholm. So some of the things that we're speaking about today, you all should derive some comfort to know that many people feel this way across the globe, not just in Newport, not just in Newton, but globally and nationally too. So it's wonderful to be here. So thank you.
Of course.
So maybe you're asking, why is it called Red Helicopter? For those of you who have taken a sneak peek, you know. So the reason why the book is called this, and the reason why there actually is no helicopter on the front, it's a metaphor for all of us, but for me, it was literally a red helicopter. And what it stands for in the end, it's intuitive truth, childlike wisdom, simple answers, not overcomplicating things, sometimes having to really cut through a lot of complexity to remember what's right. And my story literally was a red helicopter. I came home in 1976 with a toy red helicopter. This was Long Island, New York, North Shore. Parents had been in the country for maybe about 10 years. Dad was a pediatrician, mom was a nurse. So in my genes, it's caregiver genes. It's just generations of caregiving genes. And they thought that I had taken it from school, mistakenly, or not mistakenly. And they asked. And it was a modest home. It wasn't easy for the Rhees in 1976. My dad was a solopreneur. He hung up a shingle and gave care. That's what he did. And I said, no, Mom and Dad, it's not, I didn't steal it. And you have to picture me, now I have a part. I used to have, you remember the bowl? The bowl. Like, it's the classic bowl, big dimple still. And I was very flustered because I had thought I'd been accused of something like that. I was like, no, I didn't do that. So this family came in to give it to me, and I got it. And then they thought they had done something wrong. So this is a story how oftentimes truth, you think you're wrong, and you second and third and fourth guess yourself. And they said, we're sorry, because maybe we don't know the customs in the US. Maybe in public school, Long Island, every kid gives gifts. We're so sorry you were the only one who didn't have a gift to give. And then I looked at them, and I'm like, this is very deep for a 5-year-old. You know? But I'm like, no, you didn't. No, I was the only one who got it. It was just this family. And they kept asking. I didn't know why. And so my dad sometimes, you have to think about 70s parenting, particularly a little bit of Asian parenting. You have to picture me, I'm standing up, addressing my parents. Let's so picture the scene. And there's a little bit of frustration. And I finally said, I don't know. And so I had some bad feelings about the red helicopter, actually. So they found out why I had gotten it. They then called me in the room, this tiny family room, like weeks, months later, it's foggy, but they found out. And they asked me, they said, you know, why did you share, why are you sharing half your lunch that your mother wakes up every morning, Korean mother, right, love is food. It's like perfect. Why are you sharing half your lunch every day? Why are you giving your lunch away to this boy? And I said, oh, he doesn't have any. And I thought I was in trouble. Right? You know, like I'm sharing my food, I'm not supposed to do it. The way they were asking me, I went to Harvard Law School, so Socratic methodology, very early, okay? And my dad, you know, and men sometimes, you know, we have sometimes issues showing or expressing emotion, but I remember him being very emotional, which he rarely showed because he had to really put up a stiff upper lip to just survive in this country. And he said to me, "You think I'm mad at you? I'm not mad at you. Your friend, his mom died this summer. His dad came in to give you the helicopter, not his family. It was his dad and two older brothers. I remember it, it's like yesterday. And he just patted me on the head. And he gave me this toy. It was like a modest $3 drugstore toy. And so that's what happened. And I just remember that feeling you have. And I write about it in the book. It's this feeling that you have in your chest. And it felt good. And so that story is a symbol of many things, right? It's a symbol of truth, simplicity, generosity, kindness, my father's generosity, his father's generosity and grace. But it's also a reminder of things that there was some hardship for me growing up. We all have hardship. There was some hardship. And that boy that's always been in me drove me to become a high school teacher after attending Harvard, and my parents had mortgaged our house, and they said, "You're making $12,000 a year teaching high school." And I said, "Well, yeah, that's how you raised them. Yeah, it's what a beautiful thing to be able to do." But then obviously, the mayor also said, I was a lot in debt, so I spent a long time, still do, in private equity, and those values in that world sometimes can be a little different. And I had a hard time reconciling the two. There's a lot of dissonance for me, and a lot of the book is trying to figure out, and then at Ashley Stewart figuring out that maybe there's a way to sing both songs together. And that's why I wrote the book. It's a song about these two songs, and then having them create a beautiful melody.
So James, a lot of the book, to your point, is about those two different worlds. How you combined the kindness that drove you and that you were raised with as a child with also the lessons that you learned after a very successful career in private equity and, of course, with the background that you had in law. You and I both met our respective spouses in law school, so a smart decision, step one, although we always lose arguments now at home.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about how you applied that mindset and how it was helpful for you as you approached Ashley Stewart, really kind of mixing the difference between math and accounting, but also bringing kindness into the equation to build up and turn around that company.
Sure. Is this better, the volume? I'll speak up too. I'm sort of a soft talker. It's a bit of a cello. I am a bit of a cello, so I'll speak up a little bit. This happened, just to really set the stage, this was 10 years ago, 11 years ago. Ashley Stewart, it is a retail business. It sells fashion. It's also one of the largest national businesses employing and serving a certain segment of black women in this country. So just to be really precise about how this convergence was not expected. And the women, the way they were, reminded me of my mother.
Just was at a time in my life, I was 42, my dad was dying of Parkinson's, and I'm thinking about a lot of things, father of three, and imagine a business, how it was treated by capital markets or many markets. Okay, why thought 2013. There was no unsecured loan to some cash flow. They had no access to the markets. And it was about it. So in that
context, as the mayor said, I said, I don't think that this is a good thing. I don't appreciate the way people are talking about the business. We can't be this flippant about jobs. And I knew it played a role in the communities in which they were located. Much more than clothes. All you had to do was go inside and see. Clothes were not the main agenda of the store. It was comfort, trust, friendship, safety, community. That's what it was. So I left for 6 months, and this is where kindness and math started. It's not like I'd been talking about kindness a lot in my Boston private equity job. I don't think I'd said the word since being confirmed, right? It's not like I was talking about kindness. In fact, I suppressed a lot of talk about that because it was not cool. It's not cool to talk about kindness for some reason. Anyway, so in that town hall, you have to picture me now. It's sort of like, again, no bowl cut, but now it's the same stage, me standing up in front of an entire company that's undergoing a lot of pain. It's chaos. So bad that I had to hire a police officer later to protect the employees in the parking lot. So this is chaos. And me sitting there and saying, well, everything that you need me to be, I'm not. I'm not a woman, I'm not fashionable, I'm not black, I'm not anything. But I'm the only one who came. And that's what I said. And it was a truth. It's just truth. The book is about finding truth. And half the room giggled, and half the room, was like, huh, thank goodness someone's finally saying the truth. And then in that context, that's where, to address the mayor's question, I said, I know things are bad. You have no idea what's about to hit this company. I do. I'm a part of those systems. I'm a ninja in the capital markets and distressed investing. I know what's coming. You don't. But maybe if we can be kind and mathematically honest, we can come out of this together. It came out of a place from the same place that it's an intuitive place. I didn't think about it. I definitely said it and then said in my inside voice, what are you doing? What? Because I said, if we don't have those two things, and I'm going to define a bit kindness and math, if we can't agree on kindness and math, we're done. Because nothing else will be correct. So that's what I said. And so, in retrospect, it was wiser than I thought. In the moment, it was a little bit of panic, maybe. But kindness is, we have shoved it into a corner close to niceness, YouTube random acts of kindness, and it's become feminized, right? It's become more also put in a place of faith only. But secular kindness was the foundation of what Rousseau and Adam Smith publicly debated about when they were devising these radical concepts called liberty and free markets. Its Enlightenment thinking was based on kindness. It's agency. That's what kindness is. It's an investment in someone else's agency. That's fundamentally what kindness is. And we've forgotten that definition, like many things we've forgotten. And math is math. Math is science, right? Math we discover. Math you can't conquer. Math is humbling. Math is a language. It's a song. It's physics. Math is not accounting. And you're going to giggle when I say this, but accounting, which I'm very good at, I've had to build lots of models, it's made up. Yes. Thank you. Like, amen, right? It's made up. It's a convention that we've devised to compare companies across different industries and countries over periods of time to set up some sort of standardized comparison. It is not objectively true. And so given the career I've had, I've noticed a progressive, it's been almost 30 years now, in private equity and finance. Accounting, we are forgetting what kindness is, and accounting and money and finance, it's sort of become equated a bit with math, I think. And so that's what I was effectively saying, is that can we invest in an organization that encourages agency, like free will, that works together. Free will comes with accountability. Agency without accountability is chaos, which I worry increasingly, perhaps we think about agency means free will without accountability, and that's chaos. And math, can we be honest? Can we be truthful? And so that's what I said. And so I devised a whole set of new mathematical equations that supported the women in the stores who wanted agency. They were acting with agency, but the system within which they were working was clamping down on their agency. And I basically just liberated agency and then rewarded it. And that's what happened. And that was the first 6 months. I wrote it like a piece of music, which we're going to hear later. I'm a bit of a suppressed musician. I am, I think in music. And I went out to the world and I said, hi, you know who I am. I have a long track record in investing. I've got all these credentials. I'm not the public school kid from Long Island anymore. And I thought that would be enough to overcome all of the biases, everything, and it wasn't. After 6 months, the entire world laughed at me, again, and not one person gave us a nickel. And then I had to come home, and my wife said to me, "What are you going to do?" And it's at that point, I guess, I exercised my own agency, and I stayed, and I called in some favors and raised some money, and we took the company out of bankruptcy, and I stayed for not 6 months, it became 7 years. And that's what the book is about, is how these women helped me find my agency.
James, just how successful was the turnaround of this company?
Well, really successful. And I always say it's not a turnaround, it's a reinvention, because it's a creative process. It was never successful financially, so it's not a turnaround. You know what I mean? Turnaround usually means you're doing great, things go bad. The company was not financially successful. It was social capital-wise successful. The women were doing it without me. What I did a good job is just listening to them and getting out of their way. So in terms of the success, let me define it this way. I'm going to put the numbers at the end because it's kindness and math. So humanity first, and then we can talk about the math. After 7 years and after losing my mother, I decided it was time for me to not do this anymore. It was, my wife made a lot of sacrifices. Our family made a lot of sacrifices. My wife was alone a lot. And I was going into hibernation. So number one success, Dr. Frederick from Howard University randomly called me with his team on Zoom and invited me to be the Johnson Chair of Entrepreneurship at Howard University. And I cried. There was that feeling again. I was like, I can't, and I looked at it, I was like, are you sure? And I did this, are you sure? And he said, we're sure, we saw it. You're the perfect person to do this. So that's success, I think. And effectively what he said, and JP Morgan Chase putting me on their Advancing Black Pathways board to devise a new $6 billion mortgage policy about how do you use capital markets to be profitable and affect certain goals. I think that's success, right? Financially, there's a lot of other sort of qualitative things. Writing the book is success, that it's meant for families, actually. All the things that are not taught in schools, CogSci, accounting, private equity law, it's all in the book, but it's done in a very gentle way. I'm like, these are the things you need. Transformation-wise, financially, this business never made money in 23 years. Never. Our first year, we made more money, cash flow-wise, than we paid for the entire assets of the business. The IRR of the investment was, on a net basis, over 160% per annum. And the entire world missed it. They didn't see it. And I was kicking myself for those 6 months. I'm like, I must be doing something wrong. I didn't get mad. I was like, I'm failing to convey what's beautiful about this business. I'm failing. I'm using the classic same language, the spreadsheets. I'm doing it wrong. What's success? How about, I'm going to cheat a little bit and spoil a little bit of the book. People ask me, when did you know this was going to really work? Because I didn't know. Sometimes you just have to, you just jump, right? I was really confident in my relationship with the women. I knew that they liked me and I liked them. On a human level, you have to imagine me walking in every store in the US and we had no Wi-Fi, so they didn't know what I looked like. And me coming in and saying, and then looking at me and saying, okay. Years later, they told me it wasn't your appearance. We could feel your heart. That's what they said. They're like, we could feel it, that you don't talk a lot, but you were going to fight to the death with us. And I said, yeah. So I think that where I found my success, our success, was a sad moment, which is important, because there's no toxic optimism in the book, and I think that's one of the things we have to be careful about. People say, when did you know it was going to work? It was when my dad finally died. So 2 years into it, my dad passed away. And I didn't tell anyone my dad died. My daughter almost died the same week. And so I was having a moment that week. I was sort of looking upstairs and saying, come on, like I'm so tired. You know, in the business it was doing well, but you never know, right? So all the stress, and then, Macho James didn't tell anyone. So I said to my assistant, like, lie to the company and tell them I'm on my first vacation. I hadn't been on vacation in 2 years. And so I was driving back up and forth from New York, New Jersey, and Boston. I didn't sleep for 7 days. And then my dad's wake, you have to picture it. I thought it was going to be a bunch of primary care physicians in tweed coats. That's what primary care physicians wear, like the tweed coats. And mostly of his Korean friends from Seoul National University Medical School. That's what I thought it would be. But the whole company came into my dad's wake, and we had, United Colors of Benetton home office. So they all came in. It was nice. And my wife and my youngest couldn't be there. They were still in the hospital. And I saw them shaking my mother's hand. But then when that moment we all have, that moment of enlightenment for me, was the women from the stores came. So they all carpooled together, and they showed up at my dad's wake, and they were unsure if they were welcome, so now things were turned around, right? So now you have predominantly black women walking into a predominantly Asian and white wake, and they looked unsure. And they came up to my mother, and I could hear them talking to my mother and saying, oh, Mrs. Rhee, you did a good job with your son. We really like him. And my mom looked at me and got very emotional because she didn't understand what I was doing. She was worried for me. She's like, we sent you to Harvard, and we don't know what private equity is, but it seems like you were, doing well. They were worried I was ripping up my life. And I kept saying to them, I was like, no, Mom, this is I have a chance to do things better. I know how things work. Like you, and women don't get a lot of credit for a lot of things, and they don't ask for credit. I can devise a system that gives it to them, even though they don't. And we're winning. On conventional terms, we're winning. And so my mom finally got it. She looked at me and it's me. Me? I'm like, yeah. And then one of them came up to me, Cherry, and she took my hand, and she held my hand and said, James, you didn't tell anyone about your dad, about your daughter. She's like, why? Why wouldn't you tell him? Why wouldn't you ask for help? I'm like, that's it. And then she grabbed my hand and said, you didn't think we'd find out and be here for you. And I cried. I cried, in front of the entire company, Wall Street friends, college roommates, the whole world was in that, and I was sobbing. That was it. That was the moment when people say, when did you know, what's success? It's that moment. And I'm never going to forget it. And so the fact that it was financially successful, great. It was financially successful because we did the things that these women would come that week. We did those things. We successfully monetized social capital without cheapening it, just like my friend's dad did when he gave me the red helicopter. He didn't cheapen it, right? It was really just being graceful and gracious and realistic about humanity and understanding that we all need to eat too, and that money is a part of agency as well, but it's a part of it. So that's a long answer to your question. And I know, and when we met, it was like this. We've had these moments of just looking at each other and sort of just smiling. Sometimes you just know intuitively. It's I know, I guess you had the Jerry Maguire moment too, right? Similar, right? That similar track of you doing things, and finance is interesting. It is interesting. I really like investing. I still do it. And then here you are, right? You're the mayor of Newport. So not that dissimilar, right? Different venue, different form, but similar decision-making processes.
Yeah, I mean, I shared an early lesson in life that I needed to learn math. Way to put it. I had worked for a young elected official who became state treasurer. I became his deputy in 2007, and he put me in charge of communications, legislative affairs, so all the political hackery that you hear about, and then investment troubleshooting in 2007. And the market crashed in 2008. So good news, Rhode Island, you had a 22-year-old at the helm there. And had a lot of really helpful advice and a lot of guidance along the way, but rarely ever got challenged on any decision that I made. And I thought, oh my goodness, people are either too polite and too nice to challenge things, or there's a huge gap in the levels at which government understands the capital markets and finance. And so when a few years later, my political pathway hit an abrupt end when my boss lost a campaign for governor, I pivoted and said, you know what I need to do? I need to learn math. And so I went to Wall Street, and I learned math, and I spent over a decade in finance. And life was good. I was cruising along. I was a managing director and chief operating officer for an infrastructure strategy at a shop called CBRE, a pretty big real estate platform. And I was home with my partner in the fund, and I got a call from a friend. And he said, have you ever thought about running for city council? I thought, I am cruising along right now. I'm at that peak point for making money in my life. My wife is happy. Why would I want to do that at this point in time? He said, I've known you since we were kids, and you've always wanted to serve. But I think Newport needs people right now to serve at the municipal level who are willing to serve. When you look at the challenges that our communities are facing right now, whether it is climate change, whether it is trying to figure out what we do about housing, or the answer nobody has really nailed down yet, which is how you make our public education system work, not just relative to Massachusetts or New York, but actually work and create deeper learning. We really haven't figured this out yet. And so, you know, as Pete Buttigieg has said, it feels like we're in this period between big important chapters of the history of both our country and our communities. And it's that blank space between the pages. And what happens in that next chapter, we get to define if we're in the game. And so he said, I think you need to run because you're in the game. I said, well, all right, but nobody's going to be able to pronounce my name. I don't think it's going to fit on a bumper sticker or a lawn sign. And he said, it doesn't matter, go out and campaign. And so I went out and I started knocking on doors. There weren't any flashy ads or direct mail. I literally started going door to door. And the first couple stumps I got to, I was like, here is my impressive resume. You're going to love all these Ivy League degrees, which Newport does not in certain neighborhoods. And the person said, okay, thanks, and carry along. And eventually a friend of mine, Brian Arnold, I'm not sure if anybody here knows Brian, he pulled me aside and said, Zai, people like you and you're a great guy, but you need to listen. Just stop and listen. And so the next day I went out and I knocked on neighborhoods, on doors in the neighborhood, and a woman said, you know, I said, what's on your mind? What's bothering you? How do you feel things are going? She goes, I feel like they could be going a little bit better. I'm worried about, you know, whether or not my landlord's going to raise rent, et cetera, but what I'm really worried about is, and I'm glad you're here because somebody from the city had to stop by, there's a car parked outside my house. And there's been a guy sleeping in it for like a week. And I thought, here we go. This person's going to say, I need you to call City Hall and get him to move that car. And they said, I don't know what's going to happen to that person in the winter, and I'm worried. Yeah. Later that same day, knocking on doors, I knocked on a door. And this ties to the title of your book. And I said, is there anything that's bothering you that I should hear about? And the individual said, yes. My neighbor keeps landing his helicopter in his yard, and he lets it idle there, and the fumes are unbelievable. But I can't seem to get a phone call back on this. Both individuals had very valid concerns that were impacting their lives in serious ways, and they both didn't feel like government was being responsive. And I thought, I don't know if I can fix all the big challenges. I think I can roll up my sleeves and help. I don't think the system is broken. I think the system just needs a bit of a tune-up. And I think that if we want the next chapter to be brighter, that I can help. And so I left the gig in private equity and took on running for city council, and ultimately was lucky enough to win. And I had the honor of my peers selecting me to serve, which I didn't realize would result in a pay raise to $4,000 a year. And I couldn't be happier. And so it's been a great turn. Now, James, it is AAPI Heritage Month.
Yes.
And I didn't run to be the first Lao mayor in the country. I didn't run to be the second Asian American serving on the city council right now. Angela McCalla from the First Ward was the first. And yet I found it's been a really important part of my job, understanding my heritage, talking about my background, because I think a lot of people right now are trying to reconcile how we make our communities work, how we address things like race relations. And I know that in your book, similarly, you didn't take on the task you have to be the first Asian American CEO or to be the first Asian American professor leading entrepreneurship at Howard, and yet here you are. And one of the things I loved about your book are you tap into all these stories about what it's like being Asian American, being raised in a largely all-white community. One of the first stories, now I'm not going to give it all away, but one is when your family moved into a Jewish neighborhood in Long Island. And around Christmas time, they looked around and they saw the menorahs in everybody's window, so they got a menorah and put it up on the window. And one of your neighbors said, "I'm going to talk to you about that."
Yeah.
Similarly, you tell another story that really struck home for me as a boater, where you went out on the water with your father in a boat. And I was wondering if you'd share a little bit of that story with us and kind of how that framed your approach to kindness.
It's sad. I mean, so my dad and my mom were caregivers, really lived very intentional lives. My mom, after my dad's practice started faltering as he was getting sick, went and got her nursing degree renewed in English and worked at a nursing home to take care of GIs from the Korean War because she lost her mother during the Korean War. So she wanted to say thank you to that's how my parents lived their life. And so sometimes when they had incidents happen to them on Long Island, it really hurt them. They gave free care. My dad would not charge for care. Anyway, so yeah, we were on a boat, and the five of us, and my dad was an inexperienced boater, and he hit.
It was a yacht, right? It was a big boat he was driving?
We didn't have a yacht. Yeah, it was small. But the boat that we hit was pretty big. It was maybe like 40 feet, not a yacht, 40 feet, and so he hit it a little bit. Anyway, so they chased one that happened in the harbor. They started screaming at my dad. They're like, "Oh, you're an idiot, blah, blah, blah." But they also said, "You need to go back to your country. You don't even know how to ride a boat." And my dad was and the harbor was right where he practiced at St. Charles and St. Mather hospitals. And my dad was like a pillar of our community. Anyway, so my dad was sad. And that as a kid, you're watching your father. He just was in his own world, just upset. And then they came over and he thought, the boat started coming to our boat. He thought they were coming to hurt him in the middle of Long Island Sound. And they actually were coming to apologize. And they just said, "We're sorry." We were just angry. And how stupid of us to say this. And my dad was gracious, always gracious. He said, "But I watched my dad. It was sad." And so, yeah, that's, a lot of the things that are in the book, it's just going to sound, it's a parable, so I don't say a lot of things. I let people come to their own conclusions, and I think you're going to find yourself in these stories. It's a story really about a boy and his parents, and particularly his mother, all right? And then understanding how strong his mother was, even when he thought maybe she was not so strong, but in the end, strong. And then it's about a story about a group of unlikely friends. Very unlikely. If you had asked me if I would have had thousands of black women friends in my life, I would have said, huh. But it happened. And how lucky I am that I've met a group of friends. We met each other when neither of us had any credentials. We were friends. It's the best sort of relationship. We didn't want anything from each other. But it was a group of friends who taught Boy about his mom, actually. And the other story that comes out from this is, it sounds interesting to say, but it really did. It's like, it was a predominantly black colleague base, female, that reminded me and taught me what it meant to be Korean. That's really kind of what happened. And I am a huge Springsteen fan. If you gave me a guitar right now, like my wife is from North Carolina. She's a Caucasian woman, prominent family in North Carolina. I live in many different worlds, and but it really taught me to be Korean, what that meant, because it was hard to understand what that meant given where I was working, my social circles, and it's been a very interesting journey, and it's and some of the things that are happening now, I know I'm going on a little bit long, but like the other thing that's coming from this book, why it's a parable, I'm gently commenting on this beloved country. Right? I'm saying after 53 years, I had such a beautiful public education system. I'm a beneficiary of everyone's taxpayer money. How lucky I was, right? And then it's me saying, are we measuring certain positive externalities and negative externalities correctly? Where does that show up in accounting? It doesn't. Where does children show up in accounting? It doesn't. Where do all of the things that women historically have done and get undercompensated for, where does that show up in GDP? It doesn't. So while I'm telling these stories, I'm sort of doing this and scratching my head. And a lot of this is also just showing 3 different cultures in particular, actually 4. It's my wife's North Carolina culture, a Long Island Jewish culture who took care of my parents, actually, black women, and Korean. And it's running 4 cultures in parallel. And that's what enabled us to pull off this absurd transformation. It was almost taking the best from each culture and teaching each other and saying, what do you think? And then having the financial savvy to put it in a bunch of behavioral algorithms that nudge people to behave in that way. That's what the book ultimately is about. And it gives me hope because it's like what you were saying. Sometimes we try to do these grandiose, big plans to fix everything, change everything. I think the best thing I did was to realize, no, there's a lot of really good things going on here. Do you see them? And maybe we can tweak these 6, 7 things 3 to 5% each, but at the same time. What do you think? And everyone's cockles were down. No one was mad. It was a very calm transformation. I'm like, we're all good. Everything's good. And so that's why the book is written this way. It's a story. There's a lot of books these days are, this is why you're terrible. Here are the 5 things you can do to fix it. And I just don't fundamentally believe that. I think humanity, we are very flawed people and we're wonderful people. And it's just being realistic and saying there's a lot of beauty in our country, our society, and in the humanities. And let's just look at it and pause. And then after we pause, can we be mathematically honest and say maybe there are a few things perhaps we can measure more accurately? What do you think? And that's the tone of this book, but it's not just what I did at Ashley, but generally in any high transformative situation. I think the type of leadership, I'm watching, I see how you are. This is leadership, in my mind. Leadership generally gets out of the way, right? And creates an environment where people can be. So,
I had the same learn how to drive and go back to Asia comment the other day, and the reason that offended me is I learned all of my bad driving habits right here in Rhode Island. So one of the things that James taught me, though, is you just try to make incremental progress and try to get a lot of people buying into making incremental progress. Education is one of those areas where traditionally I don't think the office of the mayor or the city council is weighed in other than funding. And you help me think about that through a different lens, which is we have to think about if we're going to fix and solve for education here, think broadly. Think broadly about how we do that and how we tap into some of our community's greatest strengths. And so for me, I said some of our greatest strengths are community nonprofits and institutions. How do we work with them? The boating story you told earlier, every child in the 4th grade in Newport can learn their STEM curriculum through both on the water and off the water sailing lessons through Sail Newport. I see Susan Daly here, the chair of the board for Sail Newport. Where else in America is that part of a child's educational experience? And so if we step back and stop thinking just about the public schools and the test results themselves, and we think more broadly about the system around it, how do we integrate it all together and make sure everybody's moving towards a common direction? And so minor, we started small, it wasn't big. There's no executive authority, I have to order anybody to do anything. I said, to a handful of community nonprofits, will you take on helping our kids learn how to read? We know that less than 20% of students in Newport Public Schools can read at grade level. And if you don't learn to read, you can't read to learn. And so we leaned in with the Boys and Girls Club and MLK and EBCAP and the Pell School and said, here's what we're going to do. It's not a new program, just that existing after-school program you have. We want you to take a chunk out of every single day and teach the same reading curriculum that the teachers are trying to teach in the classroom. Same curriculum, the same way. And we're going to back you up in 2 ways. We're going to get the data, the numbers that normally we run from, and we're going to share it with you. And so you're going to know which students are struggling and what areas they're struggling in. Second, the school teachers who shoulder a burden for everything from whether or not that child's meeting their test scores to whether or not they have clean clothes to wear in the classroom. We're going to pay them a little bit extra to come in every day and to liaise with you as program managers to teach you A, how they're teaching students, and B, to share with you what they know. We're only about 4 or 5 months into this exercise. We've seen a 70% improvement in chronic absenteeism for students enrolled in this program. 50% of Newport's public school students. 50% of Newport's public school students were chronically absent last year. We've reduced that by about 1/3 this year. Second, math scores are starting to move. Math and reading scores are starting to move. It will take a while for us to focus on making that effort improve overall, but we have real engagement. We have real engagement, and the students are working incredibly hard, the teachers are working hard, and our community partners are working hard. And the all-in cost to do this for about 160 kids, again, we're dealing with a school system that's less than 2,000 students for the entire system, K through high school. So we just focused on these, 4th grade to 1st graders. It's about $400,000, which in the scheme of a substantial budget is a fraction. But the key wasn't the money, it was that the community partners from those organizations were willing to buy in on that idea.
It's social capital, yeah.
And that the teachers in the teachers union were willing to kind of, put their guard down and lean into what they love, which is teaching in these students. And so that's why I think we can do it, but we have to constantly think not only through the lens of how you get people to buy in, but how you keep holding people accountable with the math and the numbers. It's not comfortable.
Well, one of the things like with this company, Ashley Stewart, and we talked about this, I didn't view myself as CEO. So the women actually said, you're more like our pastor. And I was like, oh, that's really nice, thank you, right? But when I was thinking about, you have to picture sort of Harold in the purple crayon drawing a new set of designs and systems that could house this company, you would be surprised about the goals that I made for all of us. So number one, none of the women, we have no families forming. There are no babies. And I studied it. I'm like, no one's having babies. And so there are many things, right? So one, We weren't attracting women in their 20s and 30s to come because they didn't think the business was relevant anymore. But also because a lot of the policies did not, and the insecurity of the company, the worry about the company existing, family formation was muted. There was nervousness. So I said, oh, we're going to count babies. So when you start thinking about encouraging birth, it forces you to look at the entire design of your entire company and say, how are we going to do that? This policy, that policy, this redundancy, have to have training. Number two, like workers' compensation. Again, acting more like almost like being, I was almost like a mayor of that of this world called Ashley Stewart, right? This is what, it's civics lessons applied into for-profit and then vice versa. We couldn't get insurance. Most of the United States is experiencing that as well. When you have a demise of mutualism, good luck. Like running a solo rogue life is very expensive. Like you need each other. It defrays cost. It lowers risk. We couldn't get insurance. So I said to everyone, I said, well, if you come to work and get hurt, I'm thinking about my kids, like going to work and getting hurt. I'm like, that's ridiculous. You can't get hurt. My fault. I made myself accountable for workers' comp. Our decline, it declined like 90 to 99%, like every year. We shattered every actuarial table. And the actuarials came in and said, we've never seen this happen before in any company. And think about what this means in a world of AI. Actuarial data is zeros and ones. It's historical data. And I looked at them and said, we're not zeros and ones. Like, we're two. We're creating something new. Like, we don't want to be burdened by zeros and ones. We think we can behave better. And we took all the savings from the insurance premium going down, which is, in Japanese, you would call it muda, it's waste. And we took the premium savings, it enabled us to give salary increases. It was effectively like a synthetic dividend to the owners of that good behavior. So the frontline workers were owners of the behavior. So we wove in like mutualism in many, many different parts of the company, and this didn't cost any money at all. It was just behavior. It was clear communication, getting people's heart and mind and saying, I know it sounds a little kooky, but it will pay off. And it will pay off here in your happiness. It will also pay off in your pocketbook. And we taught it. And then people said, oh. And we did it mostly through like art and music too. It wasn't just through spreadsheets. We told stories that people could remember. And there's a whole neuroscience to that too. So a lot of the cog's eye was baked in. The intelligence was baked into the behavioral programs that we had. So those are just some, I agree with you, like these, it's harder. Changing behavior, it is hard, but it's not that hard. And then once you do it, the returns are infinite. Like there's certain problems it's really hard to solve just stroking checks. It gets expensive. And oftentimes it doesn't change behavior. And I think as a, country, we've gotten used to perhaps money can solve that, money can solve this. I'm not sure an infinite amount of money can solve the public education problem in this country. There has to be intent. Real intent, right, to do it.
So James, I don't want people to think that comedian Randy is the only friend that we share. I was with another one of our common friends yesterday for a little bit, Gina Raimondo. And she obviously has taken on changing our country and the world for the better through her role in the Commerce Department. As you think about this book tour that you're on right now, what kind of kicked it all off is a TED Talk you gave about this accounting term goodwill.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping you'll talk a little bit about a miniature version of that talk, and also why you think right now, with where we are as a country, it's so important to be doing the work that you're doing with this tour.
So Gina was a college classmate of mine.
I got comedian Randy, you got Gina Raimondo, but
yeah. But they're both awesome. They would be friends, They would. Randy, we would have to, just say, Randy, be polite. Randy's funny. But yeah, it's the TED Talk was about it was my first public thing that I did, actually. Because if you think about it, I went away. I was hanging jewelry in like Southside Chicago. I was, and really happy, actually, like feeling like we were making a difference. So in accounting, goodwill it's a technical term. It's funny how finance uses human terms in a different way. So in accounting, goodwill is the amount by which a purchaser pays over the net asset value of a company. So if someone pays $100 for a company whose book value is $80, the accountants say, why would you do that? And so they come up with an asset called goodwill, and you put 20. Does that make sense? You just make it up. And so for those of you who worked on Wall Street, if the model doesn't balance at 4 in the morning and you're really tired, what you do is that you cheat the model and you plug goodwill. Like you come up with a number and say, and you do this, and you go home, right? Because you're tired. So that's goodwill. It's a nonsensical term. Goodwill in real life, I think you all know, and I often give the example, what does that mean, James? It's why you cry at Christmas time when you watch It's a Wonderful Life. The very end of that movie, that is Mary showing her husband, look at everything you did, and you were going to throw it all away. And you did it through for-profit, a savings and loan business, all the things you did. This is mutualism on display. And all the people came, and they gave him money. And I'm pretty sure these were non-recourse loans, right? I'm pretty sure this was a gift. That's goodwill. George had a lot of goodwill, and he couldn't see it. And increasingly, many of us can't see it because we're all being primed to only see things on our phone. It's getting much harder to see and feel intangible things because we're living in a casino, right? Neurologically, we are, on purpose by certain companies, right? So that's what goodwill and goodwill are. What I'm doing now is, in Korean, there's a term called chang. It's the closest word you can have in the English language is goodwill. Chang is it's a connectedness between people. It's not measurable. You can just feel it, and you have it. And it bends space-time. It lasts generations, and that's Chang. And so what this book tour is, it's not really a book tour, nor is this book really about a red helicopter. Nor did I do what I did at Ashley Stewart just to sell clothes. I mean, that's not. And if it hopefully gives you some hope, what we did was, quote, impossible. It was very possible. We needed to use everything other than money to get it done first. That's what we did. And you had all of these faces that looked so different, and people said, you can't do it. No, we found commonality. We did it. Kindness and math, that's where we started. So what I'm doing now, if you go on the book tour tab, it's more like the modern day Federalist Papers. So at Harvard, I studied PP&E, basically, politics, philosophy, economics, particularly 19th century global PP&E. Civil War, antebellum period, when the greatest generation or the founding fathers died after 1826, what do? The founders are gone. But it's this next generation that had to define America. It's when East met West. This is when you had the black ships going into Japan in 1854. So it's a very interesting time period in the world about convergence of many different cultures and what's the world going to be? What's America going to be? And so I'm going around like the Federalist Papers. You're all now part of the Federalist Papers. I'm just asking. I'm like, what do you think? Do you believe in kindness and math? Like, can we sort of pull this together? And like, we have a different country now in terms of ethnicities and races and things, and like, can we do it? And I'm asking people, and I'm saying, it's a small example, and it was just, but not too small an example. We did it. Like, can we talk about it? Do you want to? And that's what the book tour is, and it's spreading, and it's nice the way it's been received. I'm a first-time author. I don't have a huge marketing PR. I just wrote it, and hopefully it's spreading, and people saying, yeah, this is my red helicopter story, and that's what's happening. And so if you look at it, you'll see I'm going city to city and just convening and having friends being generous enough to do this, and just in a public forum, and asking and listening, which is fundamentally what that story you just told, right after a couple of things. It doesn't matter how smart you are and how good you are with math or tech, it doesn't matter. It's still people. So you listened. And fundamentally, I think that's what I did too. I listened to the women and said, I hear you. And just sing. Sing your song. And let me figure out how I can get other people to see how beautiful it is. And if we can do that, people will come and they'll spend some money, and we can be self-sustaining too. That's fundamentally what I did. I think that's sort of what you're doing, is you're listening. It's a good song. The more I learn about Newport,
James, we have a red helicopter here in Newport.
Is it? Uh-oh.
We do. But also, our city motto is love conquers all. And I know that love is different than just kindness, but I think with that in mind, you could not have found a better stop to make this evening. This room is full of love. It's people who have been incredibly supportive of everything that I've done throughout this effort, but also who I know are particularly happy to share some of that love with you this evening. Before we open up to questions, I want to thank all of you for coming here tonight, and James, for you for making that trip down from Stockholm on such short notice. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Now, James, because we don't have enough of these.
Oh my goodness.
Corey Silken, who's here, is a world-renowned yachting photographer. He's done a lot of his work helping us renew the health of our oceans. But here's a picture of our little red helicopter between two J-boats. We came up with this idea. I was driving over the bridge, and that sightseer helicopter buzzed it. And I said, James, you know what? You got to come down to Newport. We got to have this chat. We have time for a couple questions, I think.
And we have music.
And then, yes, the music.
I was hoping to cinch all of it. There's an original arrangement that's a fractal of the entire book, that maybe you can hear what change sounds like instead of, it's music.
Perfect. So maybe 2 questions and then the music? Excellent.
I don't think we can express our gratitude for the presentation that you did tonight. By decreasing fear, reducing the fear, and building the trust, you created a miracle. But would you make some comment about gender? Do you think that the fact that you were dealing with a group of women, can you imagine that you could have been as successful? I'm thinking mostly about how decreasing the ego of people that allows them to work so closely together.
All right, men. So I'm gonna answer this always in and. So right before I had done this at Ashley Stewart, I actually did this in a private equity firm in Boston. Same issues, different product. Like one was managing money, one was selling clothes. All men. Lots of ego. About to be shut down by the LPs, by limited partners. Same. I didn't say kindness and math. I acted. It was kind environment and mathematically honest. So men, I think one of the things when I was saying about me finally admitting, breaking down in tears and saying, Macho James, there's a lot of lonely men in this country. That's not me saying it, it's statistical. I hope that this book gives some men some language to express some emotions about things, like particularly at the end when I lose my mother, was not easy. That said, do I think that it was more, that it went faster and, quote, easier, the fact that it was predominantly women? Yes, I do. Do I think that it also helped that it was predominantly black women too? In the field, in the office, it was half and half, white and black. In the front line, it was black women. Yes, I do. In fact, there is a front page Boston Globe article from 2015 that says, James has the heart of a black woman. Okay? And you have to understand, when that article came out, all my finance guys called me and said, excuse me? What's this? And I said, oh, let me explain. It's actually the highest compliment you can give someone. It's someone who cares very deeply about a collective we, and knows that, generally speaking, that sort of care is not rewarded often, and that you hope that it does get rewarded. That is the heart of a black woman. I think it's the heart of a lot of women, but I think a lot of guys have that heart too, okay? So it's not I think a lot of guys are stuck. I get a lot of calls from like very high performance guys, not happy. I do. And they're like, we're not happy. You seem so free. I'm like, I was like, it starts with you. So that's part of why I wrote this too, was me, like, stop, like, macho guy, credentials, look at me. Yeah, like, I think if anything, this sort of state that I'm in, I'm a better investor. I have less bias. I see things much more clearly. It's very calm. Decision-making process is much more fact-based. And I think when you do org theory, a lot of the studies, women generally skew that way. It's much more longitudinal thinking, less ego, more, let's get to the right answer. It is that. So I hope that answered your question. Yeah.
Any other questions? Donald?
I'm reminded sitting here.
1 second.
Not yet. That was
Sorry about that,
That was
Donald.
dramatic. That was like,
I'm reminded sitting here of a terrible incident in the 50s when a young architect of Chinese American background, I.M. Pei, was not allowed to develop and design Goat Island. That should never happen again. My second item is, talked about the bridge. The bridge is the Pell Bridge, but the bridge between here and Jamestown was opened in 1969. It's nearing the end of its economic and physical life. What can you all do, or what can we do to help to get the process started, the land taking, the design, the permitting, the financing, and the construction? I used to be in the commercial real estate business, and not that things can't be done quickly. Norwalk, Connecticut exhibited that. They're doing it in Baltimore. They did it in World War II, but we are going to need another bridge before 2069, and that process should start now. Like the bridge from Annapolis Eastern Shore.
Thank goodness this wasn't a question about assessments.
the evening was going so well.
But a good question on infrastructure. I mean, for those who heard me speak, it's like redundant. I talk about housing, I talk about education, I talk about infrastructure. We are one of those generational pages we're between is the need to renew our investment in our infrastructure. And I have made that a major focus of my entire time. We have secured a record amount of federal funding as a result of aggressively pursuing grants that are available under both the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. And I think we need to continue doing that to prepare for the next round. The bridge itself is undergoing a pretty substantial rehab right now. It's under the jurisdiction of a quasi-state agency called the Turnpike and Bridge Authority. I keep trying to get them to rename that bridge the Jamestown Bridge every time I see traffic, but they won't do it. And so there is a major investment going into that bridge right now that will extend its life. Most of our focus right now in terms of infrastructure is on maintaining the status quo, continuing to extend the life of what has been built before. But Donald, you are absolutely right that what we need to be doing is thinking more broadly about how we build the next generation of new infrastructure in this country. That was the job that I was in prior to this. I won't go too far down the ideological pathway, but when you look at how foreign nations are funding their infrastructure, it is not just through massive federal spending programs like we're currently in the midst of right now. It is also through rethinking where they get sources of equity, that being public pension plans. American public pension plans and foreign public pension plans are some of the largest financiers of infrastructure in the world. In the US, we don't do that. We primarily rely upon debt. That's a paradigm that needs to change. It's what I was working on prior to taking on this role. And when people say, you know, what do you intend on doing with your career, that is very likely what I will go back to doing afterwards. So thanks for that question.
Just follow up on what I said. Parenthetically, it was Richard Nixon who made the bridge too short. It should have been 250 from high tide to the bottom of the bridge, and then you would have gotten the Tuesday across there. So, as you well know, the Navy did most of the land between Newport and Portsmouth. So the next bridge up 50 feet high.
This is a good plug, though, on why do we care about housing? Why do we care about education so much? The Coast Guard is expected to move roughly 1,300 sailors and their families here over the next 5 years. Similarly, the event I was at with Secretary Raimondo was a groundbreaking for NOAA, where they're bringing 200 scientists and their families to Newport. If we want the federal government to continue investing hundreds of millions of dollars into this area, we need to make sure that we have a school system where those families are comfortable sending their kids. We need to make sure that we have middle-income housing for those families. And that, at the end of the day, is math. And so with that, I think it's a good transition to the song as we move. We're going to spend some time after this. Everybody wants to meet James, get a signed book, right?
I think that was, in terms of the bridge, and its design. What we're talking about right now is design. You know, one of the things I know that about your background is that two of the things that you do for, it wasn't just hobbies, it's pretty serious things that you're doing, like on the ice and on the water. Both of your disciplines require, it's force and counterforce. It's balance. And so helicopters do too, right? So the torque that enables vertical lift, which is like the greatest asset of a helicopter, it's vertical lift. It's a weakness. It has to be offset with the rear prop. It's Newton's third law, right? So like it's this force counterforce, and I think a lot of people who are in design, who are creatives, who are architects, architect is design and math, that these type of brains, and this is how the education that I'm doing at Howard and some at MIT and Duke, it's action learning that requires both sides of your brain. And so getting to the music. So music is that. And so they say Yo-Yo Ma has the most beautiful brain in the world. Because when they wire him up, what lights up, they just like, wow, like that, we've never seen anyone's brain light up like this. So music does that for us. It crosses both of your hemispheres of your brain. And so this piece, just to describe it and then we'll play, it's an original arrangement. The first piece you're gonna hear is called Arirang. If you are Korean, you know that Arirang, it actually means to be Korean. It's like God Bless America times 100. Does that make sense? It's like no one knows who invented it, composed it. It's a UNESCO protected song. It just rose from it emerged. So Arirang. The other piece you're gonna hear, you'll be familiar with, I'll name it, it's Amazing Grace. So you're gonna hear these two pieces in order of this book. You're going to hear my father die, my dad die, my mother die. You're going to hear the women come. You're going to hear me faltering in my agency and wanting to look away and go home. And so in 2 minutes, we arranged this, and this is the type, I think, of sort of multi-sensory storytelling that's necessary to get in our real life civics, to see it, imagine the future. It's hard to imagine a newness. It is for all of us. And sometimes for young people, they're not reading anymore. They're not. So what are the other ways we can show them This is what you have to delay gratification for. Right? This is what service means, whether it's your service or military service. So this is the piece. This is, I hope you enjoy it. Like any story of journey, it's always sort of sad too, because change means also death. And so that is, I hope you enjoyed that, that sort of, that feels.